Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's nice to see you all. I'm happy to have been invited to this beautiful facility to give a talk about rocks. So I couldn't ask for a nicer set. Before I begin, I just want to say a few things. I have history trail pamphlets here. We've got history trail pamphlets on the front for free. We've got some here. I encourage you to grab one of these if you haven't already and support the history of Warren County, which is how this topic relates as well to Warren County. And I'd like to begin by reading an excerpt from my book, which is available on the front table after the presentation as well. But I think this quote from the book really paraphrases the gist of why I am here this evening. So, let me just find the correct page. There we go. Few persons recognize or remember lime kilns today, yet their importance in the latter part of the 18th through the 19th century cannot be overstated. The heyday of the privately owned lime kiln was in the era of 1800 to 1880. Lime was a godsend for the farmer. No longer did he have to relocate after several years because of reduced crop yield due to depleted soils. Moreover, cement and plaster would not have been possible without it. The iron furnaces depended on lime as a flux to remove impurities from the iron, and it gave the farmer and others a cheap do-it-yourself paint in the form of whitewash, in addition to a variety of other products like antibiotics for trees and for animals. Simply stated, lime kilns and the products they produced literally helped forge our nation. The people who built and operated them for so many years should never be forgotten for their contribution to our nation's growth. Let us remember the legacy they leave for us today. And so, as we talk about lime kilns, I'd like to begin with the fact that I believe every rock has a story to share. This rock has offered many stories in Warren County over the years. For well over a century and a half, this rock was influential in directing the industrial nature of Warren County. Does anyone know what kind of rock this is? I'll give you a hint. It's magnetic. That's right. This is iron ore. Iron ore, as I'm sure many of you are aware, was very influential in directing the industry of the iron furnace down in Oxford. And the impact on history can't be understated with that. But here's another rock that isn't so familiar as the iron ore. Does anyone know what kind of rock this is? It's a toughie. Yeah. This is actually limestone, but it doesn't look like normal limestone because something has happened to it. It has endured the influence of a lime kiln. I've got other specimens up front here too that I'll put on the front table. These are pieces of limestone, but they share a rich history, not only of Warren County, but of the world. And so tonight, I'd like to tell you a tale about a rock. And I hope that by the end of the evening, you will be more impressed with these structures, these rocks, these remnants of the past that you may never have thought of before. So are you ready to go on a tour of rocks?
Yes.
I know, it sounds like a hard topic, and it is, but I think we're going to get through this. To begin, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of how these rocks came to be in the first place. Limestone. What in the world is limestone? Well, I have to tell, many of you are summer people. Anybody like the water? The ocean, the sea? Anybody like to go swimming in the ocean? I love going to the beach every year with my family, and I love snorkeling. Now, have any of you ever snorkeled or had the opportunity to snorkel or scuba dive? Where, can I ask, where did you go? Bahamas and Hawaii. Wow! Did you have opportunity to see any beautifully colored coral like this? I bet you would just love to share your experience with us. You probably have a million pictures that you've taken. Not too many, but you have pictures in your mind of how beautiful that scene was. Believe it or not, that's where our story begins tonight. A beautiful coral reef. The beautiful coral reef, these are living organisms that actually secrete different chemicals like calcium carbonate. They create their structures with this compound. And these coral reefs exist all around the world in shallow seas like the Bahamas and around Hawaii. They're just absolutely beautiful to look at. But as all living things do, living things go through their life cycle and eventually die. And right now, with the seas increasing water temperature, there are more and more of these coral reefs that are actually dying around the world and creating these deposits of detritus, these dead and decaying calcium carbonate remains of the beautiful, once beautiful coral. This seems like a bummer, doesn't it? But this is a cycle that has repeated itself over and over again throughout the history of the Earth. And when the detritus builds up layers over time, it actually forms this material, limestone. That's where limestone comes from. We wouldn't have the limestone today in Warren County and through New Jersey if it weren't for those coral reefs of long, long ago, living their lives, dying, decomposing, and building up layers of these sedimentary rocks. Now, in New Jersey, and let me see if I can actually operate this. Ah, yes, here we are in northwestern New Jersey. By the way, this is the very first geological map of New Jersey. On the left side, it was printed in 1840 through a $1,000 grant. We were talking about government grants earlier. A $1,000 grant from the state of New Jersey for the state geologist to actually construct a map of the geology of New Jersey for the benefit of the farmers. And farmers utilize this map to a wonderful extent to improve their soil yield. Now, in New Jersey specifically, northwestern New Jersey, where we are, you've probably heard of the highlands, right? And there may be mixed feelings about that word highlands, depending upon your perspective. Some of you may think, oh, wonderful protection of the watershed, the highlands, I love it. And some of you might be thinking, highlands, the politics and taking away my property rights. You know, we've got a big political divide here. We're not going to get into that debate tonight. But what we're going to do is just focus on the geology of the highlands. You see, New Jersey, in its long distant past, didn't look like it does today. In fact, we know, looking at New Jersey, we have the Atlantic Ocean on our eastern side and the Delaware River bordering on the west. But it wasn't always that way. You see, long, long ago, the ocean was to the west of New Jersey, and there were mountains to the east. And as a result, rivers flowed not southeastward, but westward into a shallow sea, which is this orange region we today call the highlands. And so the highlands, if we were to look at a closer view of Warren County geology, and I want you to think about this map as we continue our talk. Here's Warren County, here's Belvedere. Hope is where we are right now, straddling the green and the purple areas. And that will be significant here in a moment, because this green area is the Martinsburg Shale Formation. Shale also forms in shallow seas, but shale is not limestone. Limestone exists in the areas of the county that are colored pink in this particular map. And it's those pink areas that are of particular interest to me, because it is those areas, geographically, where lime kilns were possible. And I would love to see a superposition of a map of all of the lime kilns. I think that might be my next project, to hunt out all of the lime kilns in the county and superimpose them, bless you, on this geologic map. And I think you will see a direct relationship between where the lime kilns are and how their location was dictated by the geology underneath. So kind of remember that in the back of your head. Quick geology tour of limestone. Oh my goodness. If you haven't guessed, I am a science teacher. And so, sure enough, I have to introduce some science into this presentation. I gave you a little taste of geology, and now I'm going to give you a little taste of chemistry before we get into the history and the structure of these lime kilns. How many of you like chemistry in school? Okay. Me too. I love chemistry. Now, there's something called the lime cycle, which is very important for our understanding here of lime kilns themselves. Limestone exists in today for human use in the form of, well, rocks, limestone. And we can mine or quarry that limestone for our use. And there are different things that we can do with limestone. We've done different things with different substances throughout history. Look at this beautiful structure that we're in right now. The Moravians certainly knew how to use rocks. Just driving through Hope, they were master masons in terms of building such beautiful structures with the natural resources found all around them. And that ties into our story of lime kilns as well. Well, long ago in the history of lime kilns, we first developed the knowledge, and when I say we, I mean the human species, we developed the knowledge of how to work dirt in the form of clay, pottery. We learned how to use fire to heat things up. Later on, we used how to take iron ores and melt them down to extract metal and other metals like copper as well, which we could get into in Warren County, an interesting history there. But lime has an interesting connection with this technology of heat and chemistry, because when limestone is heated up, something changes. The chemistry of the rock changes, and oxygen is added into the calcium carbonate. And after taking the iron, or rather the limestone, out of these structures called kilns, which we're going to get into next, you can add water to them. Now, I was hoping to show you a video tonight, but there's no wireless connection. So I'm just going to describe a video of a process called slaking. Slaking lime involves taking the heated up burnt lime, which is calcium oxide, and adding water to it. Water is key. Hydrating this burnt limestone. And depending upon how much water you add, something different happens. For instance, and I'll just take you through this cycle. Slaking burnt lime in an excess of water, meaning too much water, turns it into a liquid putty. Now that liquid was used by people for whitewash, to clean up their buildings, inside especially when it was dark in the wintertime. They used that as a paint to put around tree trunks to keep fungus and microorganisms from inhabiting orchards. They put it on the hooves of their animals as an antibiotic. They used every single thing they could think of with these products. Farmers were incredibly, and still are, incredibly intelligent. So too much water creates this liquid putty. A little less water will produce a material that's used in mortar. The mortar holding together stone and brick comes from the use of burning lime and slaking lime, because this rock, when water is put onto it, it not dissolves, but it chemically reacts and turns into a paste. And this paste, bonded or combined with the sands and gravels and other materials, can be used as mortar inside the use of stone and brick. When you add just a little bit of water, the rock dissolves into a powdery material. And that's what the farmer was primarily interested in achieving when using a lime kiln to produce lime to add to their fields. Because lime is a very powerful base, and a base is opposite of an acid. Once you use agricultural fields, in the land, decomposition of organisms, the plant material, it acidifies the soil, it takes away the nutrients, and in the past, farmers would use up a field and have to move on. But with the technology of producing their own lime, they could stay for longer periods of time. They could lime their soil, and the soil fertility was restored, and the pH was rebalanced. Have any of you ever eaten soil? Or tasted soil, I should say. Anyone ever taste dirt? I have to be honest, fellow science teachers, right, Pete? I mean, I'm probably not even as kids, probably as adults we tried it too. But farmers did. How many of you have ever heard the expressions, sweeten the soil? How many of you have ever heard sour soil? Farmers didn't need a chemistry kit to test the pH of their soil, like some folks test the pH or acidity of swimming pools with little test kits. All the farmer would do is pick up some dirt and taste it. If it was sour, they knew that the acidity was too high, the pH was too low, and they had to add lime, because the lime would neutralize it. When they added just enough lime, that soil was sweet. They sweetened the soil. That's a literal expression among farmers of days gone by. And when the soil was sweet, it was great for certain crops. And so tasting the soil, told them about the chemistry, and it all ties into the lime cycle, which is why lime kilns are built in the first place. Now, this is where I would have had the link to show you the video. And actually, I'm just going to try something technologically here. Here we go. Here is some heated limestone being added to water. Now, this is what's called an exothermic reaction. Those lime rocks, they're not hot right now. They're not hot. But being added to the water, it's making the water boil, because it's giving off an enormous amount of heat. Now, normally, a farmer would actually add water to the lime, not lime to the water. So this is kind of in reverse, but nobody's using lime kilns these days that I could actually use a real footage on video. But notice what happens after the boiling, and this is certainly a lot of hydration taking place. Check it out. Those rocks turn from solid rocks to a paste, and then the paste turns into a powder, depending upon how much water is added. So you can see that, because it's a dynamic process. It's actually a dangerous process, too. Many farmers lost their lives using lime kilns throughout history for a couple of reasons. Number one, the use of a lime kiln itself released noxious gases, carbon monoxide. They didn't have carbon monoxide detectors back then. And they would have to tend the fires that would be burning for multiple days. And oftentimes, unfortunately too often, farmers would be guarding and stoking the fire throughout the night, get really tired, fall asleep, and never wake up. So that was an unfortunate experience. Another danger of using lime kilns was the transportation of the lime itself. You see how reactive it was in that video. It was equally reactive with any moisture in wooden wagons. And when they tried to use the slaked lime into wooden wagons to bring to the field to distribute the lime, sometimes the wooden wagons would spontaneously ignite from the exothermic reaction, and things would catch a flame, and there wasn't a local fire hydrant to put things out. So the use of lime kilns, it was a dangerous operation. So let's talk a little bit more about lime kiln history, because I think this is just fascinating, in my opinion, how lime kilns have been utilized throughout history. They're nothing new. They're nothing new. Ancient Rome, I believe they say Rome was not built in a day. Anyone ever hear that expression? Rome was not built in a day. And that's for sure. Ancient Rome took centuries to build. And the workmanship, the craftsmanship, the artistry involved in the statuary, the temples, the structures were frequently made with limestone and variants of limestone like marble. And they prided themselves on getting the most colorful, unique samples from around the ancient world of different types of limestone to build the city. Then things changed. Christianity became popular and spread through the Holy Roman Empire. And during that period in history, there was an attempt to eliminate all of the pagan idols and remembrances of that time. And so they built ginormous lime kilns. In fact, there's a whole district in Rome called the Lime Kiln district, where they would intentionally tear down the idols, the temples, the statues, etc., and burn them in the lime kiln to make lime, to recycle them, to eliminate the evidence of the past. I think that's just fascinating. Here I am. Throughout the evening, I'm going to be promoting the preservation of these lime kilns, and in history, ancient Rome was destroyed by lime kilns. I think it's rather ironic. So lime kilns are nothing new. Now, lime kilns in ancient Rome, that material that was recycled, that lime, was used to accomplish an engineering feat we have still not figured out: marine concrete. You can go to the Aegean Sea or the Adriatic Sea and do some snorkeling, perhaps, in the Mediterranean, and see these ancient underwater structures made with marine concrete that was produced with the lime of those ancient Roman lime kilns, and the concrete still exists 2,000 years later in the salt water. We've been trying to figure out the recipe for the last 2,000 years, because if any of you work in masonry, you know that even our best marine masonry today lasts maybe a decade before the salt water just dissolves it all away. Some people believe that the secret ingredient was the ash from Mount Vesuvius, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, because they used ash from volcanoes as well. Maybe there was some secret mineral found in that ash that allowed the Romans to do something 2,000 years ago that we still haven't figured out what they did. And it's still there today. And it wouldn't be there if it weren't for those lime kilns destroying ancient Rome. Now, in the United States, before we became the United States, we were a colony of various countries, including Great Britain. The British influence on lime kilns cannot be understated. The British influence was directly taken by the colonists as they spread throughout the early colonial days of New Jersey, including Warren County. Just a little side note here. How many of you have ever heard the expression of being in the limelight? That reference has to do with slaked lime being put into a projector, into a lamp, and burning that with that extreme violent chemical reaction I was telling you about, before electricity was discovered as a use for projecting light with lights. Before those days, lighting in a theater setting was produced by literal lime light. Burning lime produced a very bright light. If you've ever seen flares like for birthdays or the white fireworks, that's actually magnesium burning. Lime burns with an equally bright white light. Now, unfortunately, that burned a lot of theaters down if the attending lamp keeper wasn't paying attention. And so they were all thankful when electricity came on the scene and we could actually change a light bulb instead of changing the light keeper, who may have expired in the limelight. But we still use that expression today. Ties into lime kilns. Now, bringing it a little bit closer to home to the current day, this is a photo of the Musconetcong River Valley in the southern part of Warren County, which is underlain by limestone. It's probably the most prevalent location in the state of New Jersey where there are deposits of limestone. It was that pink area on the map that I showed you earlier. There's less pink or limestone up here in Hope. There's a lot of it down along the Musconetcong Valley, where that ancient sea, where the coral reefs were so long ago. So prevalent was the lime in the old days, it still is today, but the early farmers that settled it, in early documents of the history of Warren County, Mansfield in particular, Mansfield Township down in the southern part of Warren County, was advertised as the premier location to come and settle with your family because of the limestone valley and the prevalence of lime kilns in the area, making the soil so fertile that you would have to be an idiot not to produce a great crop each year, essentially. That's how good they were advertising the soil to be. In addition to individual lime kilns on farms, it became a commercial industry as well. There was a time, I believe 1928, if you check the records, where New Jersey was actually the country's largest exporter of lime products. This is a photo here of a package produced 100 years ago in Stewartsville, New Jersey. A friend of mine actually just gave me this picture a few days ago, showing the hydrated lime and the chemical components of that farmers would put on their fields. So, limestone. Who knew, right? You probably came this evening not knowing too much about the geology and chemistry of limestone, and perhaps some of you are thinking right now, well, I've had enough of it now, so let's move on. Let's move on. There are different types of lime kilns that have been used throughout history. In ancient days, even before ancient Rome, in what is now the Fertile Crescent of the Mideast, there were pit kilns that were used. It is believed that this technology developed about 20,000 years ago in that region of the world. And in order to produce their lime, they would dig pits in the ground. And they would put in layers of fuel and limestone, and they would burn it. And the reason they dug pits was to avoid the drafty nature of the wind. They wanted to produce what they thought would be a hotter flame to achieve the temperatures required to turn limestone into lime. And it was fairly successful. There's not much evidence of these left today, because as we all know, if there's a hole in your yard, what are you going to do with it? You're going to fill it in. And so that's what has happened with many of these pit kilns. Around here in Warren County, we see a lot of these. These are called pot kilns. Pot kilns are built above the ground, and typically their structure involves an opening on the top, where layers of fuel and limestone were placed into the pot, and an opening on the bottom under the lintel where material would be taken out of after the burning process. Now, this type of process was done initially with layers of wood, dry wood, and fist-sized chunks of limestone rocks, layered like an Oreo cookie, one on top of the other. And so you can imagine the hard work it would take for a farmer and his sons, perhaps, to be out in the field banging on the limestone rocks to get them all into fist-sized pieces to layer into these kilns. Not to mention the amount of work and effort required to build these in the first place. And this is, I just want to pause here for a moment, because this, to me, fascinates me. I grew up in Harmony on the top of a mountain where there were lots and lots of rocks. And I spent my childhood helping my dad clear the land of rocks. And we built lots of rock walls and rock piles and rock fields. We even built rock gardens with all of the rocks that were in the yard. And I know firsthand how difficult it is to take different rocks and try and build something out of them. And many of the local lime kilns around here in Warren County, they didn't use mortar to hold things together. It was an enormous puzzle that they had to assemble with the raw materials around them, and they did a fantastic job. I built a little model here of a lime kiln with little pebbles I had in my backyard, and I have to be honest with you, I cheated. I glued them together because I just couldn't get them to sit just right. So I used some, liquid cement to hold them all together to create that little lime kiln. It's not easy. And so when I drive by, certainly Hope, the town of Hope, the historic district with all of these beautiful stone structures, I personally really admire the hard labor, the ingenuity, the design, the perseverance to accomplish this task. It's monumental. And likewise, I see the same thing on a smaller scale when I see lime kilns. Now, because lime was so powerful in terms of using it as a resource for making cement and an addendum to soil, it's not difficult to see how it was eventually used in a commercial setting as well. In fact, I'm going to show you some pictures of commercial kilns in the southern part of the county. And these commercial kilns were continuously fed from above and continuously drawn out of in the bottom. And they were kept perpetually burning day after day, week after week. The whole process would take about a week for each of the kilns. So it's not uncommon to see some commercial kilns like this with numerous bays, because each of the bays here would require about a week's worth of work to stoke it, to burn it, and to extract and then clean it out to start the next batch. And so these commercial kilns would utilize these multiple bays so they could have full-time employees to keep the product running. Local lime kilns, usually just one opening. So we've got lots of lime kilns around, and so what if, we're a historical group here, what if we want to do something to preserve them? This building is being preserved, I assume, for future generations. So how can we go about preserving lime kilns? Well, Warren County, a number of years ago, I think it's about 20 years ago now, produced a little pamphlet in search of lime kilns. Have any of you seen that little pamphlet? It's available from the Historical Society in Belvedere, where they're based. It's a great start. It's a map that shows the positioning or the location of some of the local lime kilns that were easily visible from the road. But they're not all there. There's a lot more to be found. How many of you have ever seen the Beers Atlas, the county atlas? I have a copy of it right up front here, and I have it open to Hope, which is probably of your interest tonight. And the Beers Atlas, printed in the 1870s, is a great historical record because we can draw upon a lot of information from the Beers Atlas, including the location of not only lime kilns, but the lime quarries that the lime was removed from. And what's even better than that from a historical point of view is the Beers Atlas is chock full of all of the names of the landowners and the people associated with these locations, which many of them are part of the historical record that can be researched and discover more information from. So here's an example of a blow-up of the Beers Atlas down in Carpentersville. Here's Carpentersville, south of Phillipsburg, and notice, lime kiln, lime kiln, lime kiln, lime kiln, lime kiln, lime kiln, lots of lime kilns. Not so many up here in Hope, by comparison. And of course, I alluded earlier to the fact that that's a direct relationship to the geology, the rocks underneath an area. But I'm going to show you some slides of these limestone, these lime kilns both along the Delaware River, which are very significant. Now, in the 1970s, there was a booklet that was produced in an effort to preserve history about the architecture of Warren County. And I'm trying to recall his name, and I can't recall his name right now.
Dennis Bertland.
That's it, thank you. Dennis Bertland. Dennis Bertland put together, thank you so much, Pete. Dennis Bertland put together this great little booklet photographing a lot of historical structures. And in his book, he recognized the Fleet Kiln in Bloomsbury and the Shannon Kiln, a little bit closer to here, in Bridgeville. And so we have lots of photographs, historical photographs of different kilns. But here's a great example of a preservation attempt and success of a lime kiln in Warren County. How many of you have been to the ShopRite on Route 31 in Washington? If you're familiar with that ShopRite, you know exactly what you're looking at. Because the Musconetcong River Watershed Association teamed up with other organizations, including the National Park Service, did a fantastic job of restoring and preserving the Musconetcong River Valley lime kiln. Now, this was a commercial endeavor. You can see there are multiple bays here, but it is so well preserved with signage and even a little parking area that you can go over, and the average person can be their curiosity can be piqued. They can actually stop right there, get out, and educate themselves about what in the world is a lime kiln in the first place. What is it that we're looking at? So kudos to them for doing a marvelous job of preserving a commercial lime kiln. Now, I showed you that map from the Beers Atlas earlier where lime kiln, lime kiln, lime kiln along the Delaware River. Have any of you ever taken a trip along the River Road in Carpentersville, south of Phillipsburg? You've probably seen these kilns. They're beautifully visible to the eye just driving by the railroad tracks. Again, that was a commercial series of lime kilns. Have any of you ever been on the Phillipsburg Railroad excursion? Maybe with Peter Rabbit or Santa Claus or Thomas the Train. They all run down the old Belldell Railroad line there, and where they have the Easter egg hunt every year. They stop at this series of lime kilns. It's a series of 13 lime kilns, again a commercial endeavor, that was used many years ago, but for about a century, producing enormous quantities of lime, some of which was transported on the Morris Canal, which is very famous in the history of Warren County. Now, what interests me more than these commercial lime kilns are the local lime kilns, because commercial lime kilns, you know what? You're hiring an architect, you're hiring a labor force, you're hiring people to actually design and build and operate this thing. And that's all fine and good. I'm not here to detract from that. But personally, I am really impressed with the individual farming family scattered throughout Warren County in these limestone valleys that figured this out for themselves. And the diversity and the engineering and the troubleshooting that the average person was able to accomplish, to me, just gives me goosebumps. You know, having personal experience working with rocks and, you know, self-proclaimed pyrotechnic interest person when I was younger. You know, as a science teacher, I'm always, you know, amazed. You know, we make fireworks in class, you know, learning about chemistry, because I love this kind of stuff, as you can probably tell. But for the first people to be able to figure these things out and make them work, to me, is amazing. Now, these are not from Warren County. As you can see from the slide, Lancaster County has done a fantastic job of preserving local lime kilns. All of these are local lime kilns that were built by individual families. And they have such a powerful coalition of historically minded people in Lancaster County that they have been able to do a fantastic job. In my book, I actually give a link to their website where you can actually take a virtual tour of all of these lime kilns, then take a driving tour, just like we have the History Trail tour in just a few weekends from now through Warren County. But I want you to take a note of the different designs here. We've got the pointed peaks, we've got the rounded peaks, we've got the square peaks. All of these are completely different designs because different personalities, different individuals, different raw materials, different needs, different ways of accomplishing the task and troubleshooting the draft ratios and getting the airflow just right and being able to have a structure large enough or small enough to suit your individual needs. To me, this is fascinating. Fascinating relic of a century and a half of our history that was so pivotal in forging our nation. So here in Warren County, we have a slightly different story. Some individual kilns that you can visit have fallen into disrepair. Some of them have just become piles of rocks. They are quickly disappearing from our landscape. One such example of this is at the Peak West Hatchery along the Natural Resource Trail. You can visit a local lime kiln that is essentially now just two piles of rocks. A pale reminder of what it used to be. And we're left with just pictures and signage to explain something that's not visible anymore. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to build my model of a lime kiln, so you can actually see it almost in operation. I didn't want to ignite it. I don't want to start a fire in here, but you'll get the idea of the lots. White Lake, public property, one of the very first Warren County parks. It is beautiful, and you're not too far away from White Lake. How many of you have been to White Lake? Absolutely phenomenal facility. I had the good fortune to have been serving on the Board of Recreation Commissioners of Warren County many years ago, and was one of the founding members of the Warren County Municipal and Charitable Conservancy Trust Fund Committee, which helped to provide the funding from the county to purchase White Lake and make it one of our first county parks. It is an absolutely beautiful facility, and it's underlain by limestone, by the way, which is why it's called White Lake, because from above, all of that beautiful marl, which is calcium carbonate, looks white. It looks like a Caribbean Sea. If those of you who've never been there, it's worth seeing. But I will never forget the first time I was ever at White Lake and I hiked the trail around it. How many of you know what I'm about to say? When you come on to that marl works, that ice structure, that ice house, I felt like Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom or something. What in the world is this structure? It's absolutely ginormous. I couldn't believe it. And then I did some research on the history of it and was just even further amazed at the stonework. that's still standing today, and what a fantastic reminder of our history's ingenuity. You know, the people who actually put that together. So White Lake, great place to visit. If you've been there, many of you have, how many of you have seen the Lime Kiln? Much fewer of you. It's on the northern side of the lake, kind of in a corner by itself, down a bank, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for most people who go to White Lake. Ramseyburg, a little bit to your west here, at the homestead there, there is a local lime kiln, and I'm hoping that this will be one particular location where they will be able to restore and preserve this particular lime kiln down there. It's on their property, which is available to the public, which is one of the important parts of preserving some of these local lime kilns. One of the barriers, one of the difficulties. Private property ownership. Trying to convince a private property owner to say, hey, yeah, you can all join me in sharing the liability of coming onto my property and potentially getting hurt looking at my rocks that I really don't care about. You know, it's difficult. Lancaster County, different story here. But here on the left is a lime kiln at Merrill Creek. Again, on not really public property, you know, privately owned by the power companies, the utility companies, but available to the public. And, you know, the lime kiln at Merrill Creek, I think, has a lot of potential for preservation in Harmony Township. The one to the right there is on Route 519, the same road that ends here, not ends, but takes a sharp right turn in Hope. But further to the south, there's a lime kiln on the right in Harmony Township that is in danger of being lost. As I'm sure you've heard, you know, there are potential plans for the widening of Route 519 and various construction projects that are in debate right now, a little bit to your south, that could endanger the future of this particular lime kiln. Here's another one, and I'm showing you some of these examples of local lime kilns to demonstrate the different nature of their architecture, their usage, and their size. This one is in Washington Township to our south on Spring Lane. It is a beautiful, bucolic setting. And it's right along the roadside that you can easily see, especially when the foliage is done. And it is very well preserved on the inside that you can drive by. Also in White Township, there is a road called West Quarry Road. I have to be honest with you. The photos that I'm about to show you, I don't think I could take the same photos again. How many of you recall the terrible storm over the summer? This part of the road was completely destroyed. I think it's very likely, I haven't been back to this site since, but I know the road that it's on was completely washed away, utterly destroyed. The rocks were just washed down. The road was completely, literally washed away. And so it's likely that this one and the following one no longer exist due to the ravages of the environment and the passage of time. They more than likely have suffered the fate that many of them will suffer over time, being either ignored, utilized as a natural resource to build other things with the perfectly shaped stones, bulldozed over to just build something else. Because without the education and the awareness, if you're not even aware of what this pile of rocks is, you may just think it's nothing more than a pile of rocks, just to be bulldozed down. And here's another challenge. Do you see the lime kiln in that picture? For anyone interested in hunting for and finding lime kilns, local lime kilns throughout our county, sometimes it's tough to see. But if you look right in the middle, here's the opening of a lime kiln. This is a hidden lime kiln that is on a friend's property that I was able to take a picture of. And I want you to notice, this particular lime kiln is beautifully preserved. Here's the opening that the slate line would be removed from. And I want you to notice this pile up here. It's not really a pile, it's an opening. an opening to the pot. This is a view looking down into the pot. And so this is very well preserved. You can see, and this is about, I would estimate, about 12 feet in diameter. That's the opening. A little bit smaller than the red circle on the floor of the gymnasium here in the center. But that pot is open to the bottom where the layers of fuel and limestone would be laid in order to ignite and burn. Right down the road, as you are all aware, is the Swayze Lime Kiln set. This is an absolutely beautiful lime kiln, and it is so delightful to see how well it is preserved. And I have to just tip my hat to Hope, the town of Hope, and you folks having an interest in your local history, preserving the stonework of the Moravians of so long ago, and being able to educate and share that information with others. It is a testimony to your generation to be able to pass that on to future generations. Because if we don't preserve these things now, they will be lost forever, especially these local lime kilns. This, incidentally, was a photo of that lime kiln, and if you've driven by it recently, like I just did, an hour ago, it looks so much nicer than that now, because it has been refurbished and preserved so well. This picture was taken in 1933. During the Great Depression, our nation was endeavoring to take photographic evidence of as much of our history as they could. It was one of the work projects during the Depression years, to get people out and do something productive instead of just receiving a check. Sorry, I didn't want to get into politics this evening. But you get the idea. They were accomplishing a task that we can utilize even today.
What's interesting about that last picture that you had up, I believe that's on Jason May's property. And Jason is a mason with Tom Thurgood. And he lights it up at Christmas time and puts a wreath on it.
And it's absolutely beautiful. I've seen it that time. I'm looking forward to another couple of months when it will be up again. I was actually reading about him and his family and the restoration of the cemetery and the whole Swayze property.
Right.
And again, kudos to you folks in Hope for having an interest in preserving the past and taking pride in the past and presenting it to other people to enjoy. It's just, that's not a common thing. And so, again, hats off to you folks for having that interest in history. That's just wonderful. And it takes a mason to understand the complexities of the design and putting things together to make that a reality. So, wonderful job, wonderful job. So here is just a photo of my model here, illustrating some different things that were common in the day of local lime kilns. Many of them, if you look for them today, were built on hillsides. They were built into the hillside for a good reason. Number one, you had to fill them from the top. So you wouldn't want to climb a ladder, you wouldn't want to climb the kiln, you'd want to just use the landscape itself as a ramp to get up to actually deposit the layers of fuel, and you have a ready supply of wood for fuel and a ready supply of limestone broken up into fist-sized chunks to put into the top. You'd also have fuel at the bottom. You'd have the farmer and the tender at the bottom to remove the slate line and some way of transporting that locally to your farm. I've read in historical books on the history of Warren County, farmers were very intelligent mathematically and could calculate and distribute just the right amount of lime over certain acreage. And I read about formulas about how they would do this and then crisscross the lime into their fields back and forth to get just the right concentration of lime to improve their soil fertility. I mean, they were brilliant with their brains and their bodies to put things together. And I mentioned earlier the dangers involved in producing and transporting this lime. But in my estimation, I just have to reiterate, Lime Kilns, the local Lime Kilns, what a testimony to the ingenuity and the hard labor of our original settlers taking advantage of their natural resources to make it work. And they did. For over 100 years, they made it work. And I think personally it would be a shame to lose sight of these local features made of rocks. And so my hope is that after tonight, you may not just view this as a gray rock, but a natural resource, limestone, that was, and by the way, these 3 samples that I have here, I have recovered from local lime kilns. So when I look at these rocks, I think about the struggles, the hardship, the blood, sweat, and tears, literally, that went into forming what I'm holding in my hand right now. This is so much more than just a rock. This is history before us now. And so I hope you've gained a slightly better appreciation for local lime kilns and hopefully a better understanding of how they work, how they're made, and how they're distributed all around. And I think it's time for questions. If you have questions, feel free to just shout them out or yes.
So what I'm looking at up there is a lime kiln. What type of rock did they use? Because if they were burning lime with limestone, did that cause a problem?
That is a very good question. And the answer is, yes, they would use a different type of rock. So these farmers were not only agriculturalists, they were geologists too. Many of these rocks that they would use to actually form the structure would have a greater concentration of quartzite, a rock that is more durable than the limestone itself. These rocks would have a much lower percentage of the calcium carbonate in them. Otherwise, the whole kiln would begin to burn and could be slaked. So yeah.
So another point of interest, you were talking about White Lake being preserved by, and you were on the committee. I was just there last night giving out, I'm on that committee. This camera, this young lady and a few other people here, got this from that same committee.
Wonderful.
And we're using it to help preserve the stories, because we're going to have this now here, and it all ties back into a computer that we're going to have that with. Also, these windows are going to be restored based upon that same committee you were talking about history.
Fantastic. That warms my heart. I remember when that committee was first started up, I was on the first committee with Jim Lee. And many of you probably know Jim Lee. I was fortunate enough to have served with him on that committee and to benefit from his stories that the boatmen told. Wonderful, wonderful guy, and what a testament. His whole family is a testament to the preservation of Warren County history as well. Question?
Old growth forests, were they pretty much wiped out because of the lime kilns?
Yeah, that's another good question. I don't know if you're familiar with Herbert Kraft and his son John Kraft, popular authors. Herbert has since passed, but his son is still writing. They were influential in starting the Lenape village, Waterloo Village, many years ago. And in reading some of their books, I learned that it wasn't really the Europeans who clear-cut virgin forests here in New Jersey. Well, Lenape had already taken care of that. They had moved from field to field, or forest to forest, making fields from forests, and so there are very few virgin forests that were even in existence when European settlers came on the scene. I wasn't aware of that before I was educated by the Herberts, or by the Crafts.
And another question, I know across the street from where I live on the old Lester Mack farm, there's a beautiful lime kiln on private property. So do we have any idea how many kilns there are in the county, or is it just we have a count of the ones that are accessible by road?
I just discovered this past weekend, interesting you asked that question. There is someone, Gina, who works at the Warren County Historical Society over at Shipping Manor.
We got the camera from her.
Pardon?
We got the camera from her.
got the camera from her. I haven't met her. She was hoping to make it tonight, so I was hoping to meet her this evening. But evidently, Gina, you're not here, right? So she didn't make it tonight. But Gina, thanks for the camera. But I communicated with Gina this past weekend. I was doing a series of storytelling talks at the Warren County Balloon Festival down at the Warren County Community College this past weekend, and happened to make some contacts, and Gina was brought up, and we communicated back and forth through text. And I understand she is working on a project right now that I was hoping to talk to her tonight about, but I'll talk to you via email very soon this week. She is actually cataloging the location of local lime kilns in Warren County, updating that map from, I believe it was 1991 when that last In Search of Lime Kilns in Warren County was produced. And I believe, and I may be misquoting her, but I think she has found 87 of them throughout Warren County. That number sticks in my mind. I think it's accurate. And she's still on the search for more. And some of the challenges of finding those, certainly, number one challenge is private property and access to the sites. So it takes local folks like yourselves who have an interest in personal knowledge of your property or your neighbor's property to actually get an accurate inventory of what's still left. And once an inventory is established, which Gina is working on right now, then you have to talk about preservation. The possibility of preservation. Is it accessible? How much damage has already been done? The vegetation that grows through these structures does an enormous amount of damage very quickly. And once those, Eddie Mason will tell you, once those cracks are produced between rocks, you have the frost freeze thaw cycle that just is a powerful destructor of this type of history. So, yeah, good question. But to my knowledge, I think 87 is the magic number right now. I'm hoping to add to that number.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you. I appreciate it.